Justice Through Journalism. And she was a 2016 Nieman Fellow at Harvard University. Wendi is a regular contributor to the Christian Science Monitor and The Undefeated. A proud product of Memphis Public Schools, she is also a senior writing fellow at the Center for Community Change. And tonight we are very fortunate. Wendi is going to talk to us about her reporting project that is centered on economic justice. She's also going to talk about Confederate monuments, the I Am a Man Plaza, and the public spaces that we create. So I'm going to turn it over to Wendi, and thank you.
Sorry if my back is kind of to you. I'm really excited to be here with y'all today and tell you a little bit about my project and some other random thoughts that are in my head. For those of you who may not have met me before or were hoping to get something different today, my apologies. My name is Wendi Thomas, and I am a journalist here in Memphis. I grew up here. I wasn't born here. I was born in Ohio, so depending on the crowd, I can claim to be a Yankee, depending on how things go. But I am a proud product of Memphis City Schools, campus school, and then White Station. And for 11 years, I was the Metro columnist at the Commercial Appeal. Actually, today marks my 3-year anniversary from leaving the Commercial Appeal. So, and I'll talk a little bit about that more later when I talk about Confederate monuments and violence. So today what I do is I am the editor and publisher of MLK 50, Justice Through Journalism, and it's a year-long reporting project focused on economic justice. This is the project that I pitched when I went to Harvard, applied for the fellowship. When I was at the paper for the 40th anniversary of Dr. King's assassination, I was already thinking then, well, I coordinated that coverage, and I was already thinking then about what would we do for the 50th anniversary. So for me to be running this project now is the culmination of a dream. It's a nonprofit initiative. We focus on 6 different themes, so racial equity, jobs and wages, affordable housing, criminal justice, black businesses, and power and wealth. It is inspired by Dr. King. Most of us are familiar with his vision of racial justice, like that part of his legacy we're familiar with, but we often leave out the part about economic justice. And if you look at why King was in Memphis, in the spring of 1968, it was economic justice. He came on behalf of underpaid, mistreated black public workers who were trying to unionize, right? And so I think it's important as the 50th anniversary of his assassination approaches to remind people of that and to force them to reckon with that. One of the things I've been telling people is that at least in 2018, you will not be able to say that you honor King and pay your workers below a living wage, right? That's inconsistent with who he was and what his mission was. And so I want to prick people's conscience. We are deliberately disruptive. Our point of view is from the standpoint of the marginalized. That's our lens through which we approach the world. And I'm getting the opportunity to create the kind of newsroom that I would have wanted to work in. So I'm making it a priority to hire women and people of color. That's important to us. And we pay better than any other news outlet in town for freelancers, right? Because we're committed to that. I'm not going to replicate economic injustice in a project about economic justice, right? So that's a non-negotiable. Some of you may follow me on Facebook. I'm a big Facebooker and tweeter. This face is really familiar, I'm sorry. Did you just? Yes. What's your name? Okay, sorry y'all. This is Miss Van Dyke, who was my music teacher at campus school. Transformative woman. Just this weekend, my family is in the Blue Ridge Mountains, past weekend, for Memorial Day weekend, not Memorial, Labor Day weekend, we're in the Blue Ridge Mountains and we're sitting around a campfire, we're doing s'mores, and we're trying to sing, we're singing songs. We start singing the campus school song.
Oh, I know.
I've got to hug this man.
How did you go?
She was so amazing. Public education, y'all, is so important. I got a great education. And when we were in choir, when we had to sit down, we were talking about how important it is for teachers to be able to give kids signals without saying a word. And so when we sat down, she was like, now it's when we were supposed to sing. Oh. Man, all the songs I could sing. So sorry, y'all, about that interruption. So we pay our workers better than a living wage. We've got a lot of great stuff we're doing. I'll just run through some of the stuff on the site really quickly. So one of our themes is jobs and wages, and so we cover those issues here in Memphis. One of our contributors, Andrea Morales, did this photo essay about Labor Day, I don't want to call it a protest, demonstration at fast food restaurants. I think personally it's a shame that someone could work full-time for 20 years in the same profession and make $9 an hour. I know if my mother were ill and needed care, I would not want the person caring for her to make poverty wages. To me, that's unconscionable. The woman that we talk about in the story, she needs surgery, but she can't afford it because she works for a contractor. It's not, it's like not temp work, but she doesn't get benefits, she doesn't get sick time, that sort of thing. So she needs health care that she can't afford to get because she can't afford to miss those hours. We wrote about recently, this writer here wrote a great story for us about a bakery that's going to open in Crosstown, Lucy J's, and they're going to pay their workers a living wage, right? And so this is right. That's great. And so we also want to uplift people who are doing the right thing and businesses who are doing the right thing and trying to live their values in this way. And we've written a little bit about environmental racism. So this is a dump that's being proposed for Fraser. I was trying to think the other day of what would happen if they tried to put this dump at Poplar and Yates or somewhere in that area. I mean, it would never even be proposed, right? Because the understanding would be that that is unacceptable, that is not the place for that, right? But somehow this could be the place for that. And so these are the kind of things that we write about, we prioritize. We've done a lot about the Confederate monuments, which I'll talk about a little later. We've been covering some of the issues around immigrants here in our community. This is another photo essay from that same photographer. And we're also trying to prioritize the voices of people in the community. So there's a Latino minister, Rondell Trevino, who we have hired a couple times to write essays for us. There's this here, the guy here, bottom right, is Earl Fisher, Reverend Earl Fisher from Abyssinia Baptist Church. He's been very involved in Black Lives Matter movement here in Memphis. I'm not going to go through everything. We wrote about the Medicare cuts. We did a lot around the anniversary of the bridge protest and what's happened since then. More on immigration. Here we've written some about power and wealth. These are some of the first stories we wrote about the Loeb family legacy. I don't know if y'all remember several months ago, Henry Loeb, who was the mayor of Memphis when King was killed, his granddaughter was called on recording making some intemperate remarks that reflected a degree of class privilege and maybe race privilege directed toward workers. And it was kind of what was raised was, do you know who I am? And so I thought, you know what, actually I do know who your family is. And it's funny, I have a lot of history books on Dr. King, and I've been rereading them as I've been working on this project, and in the margins of one of them, I'd circled a bunch of stuff about the Loebs and had written notes to myself about, like, research the family legacy and that sort of stuff. Because Henry Loeb was the mayor, his papers are on file at the Memphis Room at the library, and it's just a wealth of information and details about him and his family's finances that otherwise just would not be available. And so this gave us an opportunity to really look at power and wealth and how those legacies persist and show up even today. The family made their money through laundry chains. Some of you who are older, lived in Memphis longer, you may remember the Loeb laundry chains. There's a gentleman who was at the University of Memphis who wrote his dissertation on the Loeb families. Part of the way they were able to amass the wealth they did is that they didn't give raises for 25 years. Now, what kind of profit could you make as a business if you didn't raise your wages for 25 years? Today, that money has passed through the generations and shows up in the form of Loeb Properties, which is a real estate titan around town. Loeb Street is near where I live, near the University of Memphis. And when I drive by it, I think of how I'm reminded of that, right? And so it's a very small version of the same kind of offense I take when I see the Confederate monuments. It's who matters and who gets to have their name where, right? And I think it's something that y'all think about in terms of the lynching project and these monuments and these markers. And it's something that we think about with MLK 52. I'll just scroll back up to the top so we can have the worker at the top. So there's two parts of MLK 50. One is the journalism, which is my background, it's what I do. I went to school for journalism. When I went away to Butler University in Indianapolis a million years ago, I wanted to be a pharmacist, like my mom. My mom's a pharmacist, and that's what I thought I was going to do. So I go away to Butler, and I'm in my freshman calculus course, and I'm like failing, which in my immigrant family, my mother's Jamaican, is like a C, right? So in my family, a C is failing. My dad told us growing up that A stood for average, so just to give you a sense of where the bar was. So I'm in this freshman calculus class, I'm getting a C, I'm there on scholarship. I'm the oldest of 4 kids, so I know that, my parents can't really afford to foot the bill if I lose my scholarship. So I had always loved to read, and I thought that reading and writing were kind of the same things in my 17-year-old mind. And so I switched my major to journalism. And the rest was, as they say, history. I actually wanted to be a sociology major, but my dad said that I would starve if I became a sociologist. So I became a journalist because they make so much money. They're really raking it in. So one part of the project is the journalism, and that's my background. Went to school for that, went to the Indianapolis Star, the Nashville Tennessean, the Charlotte Observer before I came back here in 2003. The second part of it is an economic equity pledge that I want to develop for the community to take, and things are aligning, the planets are aligning for this to come together. But when I think about what King, based on my reading of him, would appreciate what he would want to see us do to remember him. It's not a gala event, and it's not a poetry slam, or it's not a series of concerts. He would want us to take some kind of action, right? He would want us to make a commitment to bringing to reality what he wanted to see, and a lot of that involves how we treat workers and how they're compensated. Memphis, as you may know, is the second poorest large metro in the nation. The poverty rate for Black children is 47%. 47%, so nearly half. To me, that's unconscionable in the richest nation in the world, but it's a reflection of the choices that we have made. And so I want this pledge to help us think about the choices that we make. I've started asking, when I go to a restaurant or what have you, after I pay and tip my server well, because you should do that. I've started asking if the manager can come over and ask them, hey, it's really important for me to support businesses that pay a living wage. How do you think, is that something that y'all think about or talk about, right? And I don't know that that's the right language, but I'm kind of like beta testing it myself, because I think we need to have a community conversation about that, right? And if we collectively say, we're not gonna support businesses that pay their workers so little that they qualify for food stamps in Section 8, because what that means is that we, the rest of us, are subsidizing this company's profits, right? And so I want this pledge to have specific measurable action steps, things that people can put on a to-do list, right? And say, okay, I am taking these steps. One of the things we can do is be intentional about supporting Black businesses. And I try to do this today. I had lunch downtown at a place that's 20 minutes from my house when I could have easily gone, right around the corner. But achieving social justice requires sacrifice. It requires, if we believe it's for the better good, for the common good, then we're gonna have to sacrifice something. And it's not always easy, and sometimes I'm lazy and I just go around the corner instead, or I don't live out my values, but I think that this anniversary gives us an opportunity and a sense of urgency around living what we say we believe. So, for those of you who follow me on Facebook, I started some stuff this morning. I'm a big fan of WKNO. Did you see me on Facebook today? I'm always starting stuff on Facebook. Is that yesterday? It's every day. And so I'm a big fan of WKNO Public Radio. I listen to it every morning. I turn it on. I have the app on my phone and I listen to it before I even get out of bed. And for some reason this morning, John Malmo's minute set me off. I have no problem with Mr. Malmo. I don't know that I've met him. If I do, I don't recall. Which is just testament to my memory, not his remarkability. But they have 5 regular segments that they do there Monday through Friday, and none of them are by people of color in a city that's 63% black. Now, King has this quote that he says, that is not one of the ones that we remember, but he says, if a city is 30%, he said Negro, but I'll say black. If a city is 30% black, you should expect companies in that city, their workforce to be 30% black, and not just in the menial areas, right? So if you apply that principle of parity, basically, it's the same principle that we think about when we talk about the gender disparity in the Senate, right? The idea that the country's half women, that you might expect the Senate, if everything else were equal, to reflect that, right? But if WKNO has these 5 spots, all done by lovely people, and none of those are by people of color in a city that's 64% black, in a county that's 54% black, in a metro area that's 47% black, then what does that say about their priorities and whose voices are heard, whose perspectives are amplified? And so there was a vigorous back and forth today, but the upshot is that Justin Willingham, who's one of their on-air personalities, and I are gonna work to get somebody of color on the air in one of these segments in the next couple of weeks. So it's a very, very, very tiny, small thing, but I think it's how you shift the narrative and how do you begin to think about these things and infuse equity into all of your decisions. I was online looking at their board, and I'm just picking on WKNO because they were how I started my morning. They have a 15-member board and 2 of them are women. Why? How does that make sense? How does that, how do we justify that? I think if you stop someone on the street and said, hey, do you think women deserve an equal role in society? Most people are gonna say, yeah. Okay, but then what does that look like in tangible, measurable terms, and how can we be intentional about it? Because if all this stuff were gonna happen organically, it would have already happened, but it hasn't. And the choices we've made have gotten us where we are, and so how do we decide to do something different? Not doing something is also a choice, right? And so staying silent is a choice. You're saying that this is not a priority for me, and that's fine, but you have chosen. I think it's not a wise decision, and you can likely expect feedback about the choice you've made to sit this out, or to not get involved, or to not intentionally, patronize businesses that pay a living wage, or not to seek out black businesses to patronize. Those are choices, and we can make different choices. So if you're not following us on Facebook or Twitter, I encourage you to do so. We're at MLK50 Memphis in both spots. Follow me on Facebook, where I get a lot of stuff started if you're on Facebook. And check out the stuff that we write on our site. It's MLK50.com. We are in partnership with the National Civil Rights Museum, which has a kind of citywide MLK 50 observances going on, and so we are in partnership with them. But we are editorially independent because I need to be disruptive without pressure. So, well, there's always pressure, but without it affecting the Civil Rights Museum's ability to raise money. So I wanted to say a couple words about the Confederate monuments. If you live in Memphis and have been conscious, you know, for the last few months, you're probably up to date on what's going on. The Nathan Bedford Forrest Monument in what is now Health Sciences Park, and the Jefferson Davis Monument. There's an incredible push led by activists to uproot those, move them somewhere. It even came up in the Miss America pageant last night. Was anybody watching? They asked Miss Texas, you know, what she thought should be done with the monuments, and she actually said they should go into a museum. And I was like, what? It was great, right? Miss Texas. Just challenges stereotypes, which is good. I need my stereotypes challenged. So we've written a lot about this. There's been a lot of discussion about this, and I have maybe a more personal connection to the monuments than most. Right before I left the Commercial Appeal, well, not right before, but in the months before I left the Commercial Appeal, I wrote about the monuments a couple times. So one of the times was in January 2014. And some of you might remember the Sons of Confederate Veterans had put a marker in what was, had just been renamed, the park had just been renamed. It was this big granite marker that they plopped down in the park. They didn't have city permission, but they just put it there. And the city CAO at the time, George Little, like sent a crane over there and was like, out of here, right? Which I thought was kind of brilliant. So after I wrote that column just about, you know, how peeved the Sons of Confederate Veterans must have been to have this black man disrupt their marker they'd put there, I got an email from a gentleman, and he said, Wendi, you're a nigger bitch, you really are. Now, that's not like a big deal, because, well, I mean, it's rude, but I would get those kind of things all the time. And I tell you all the time, like once a week. There was a guy who would call me every other week for years. Call me fat, call me nigger, call me bitch. I mean, just, it happens. It happens a lot. So that was in January. I told my editor about it, and he said, oh, you know, don't worry about it. You know, no big deal. It was a male editor. Don't worry about it, no big deal. And then in March, I wrote about the markers again. And at that time, I wrote that the city was going to sell the marker because the Sons of Confederate Veterans wouldn't come get it after the city took it out of the park. And I got another email from the same gentleman. He wrote, Wendi, you really are a nigger bitch. One day I'm going to grab you, rape you in that burrhead pussy of yours, and throw you in the street like the trash you are. Now, that threat was scary to me. I'm a rape survivor, and so while I couldn't imagine getting killed, I've gotten death threats before. Like, I'm not dead, so I couldn't really imagine getting killed, but I could imagine a sexual assault again. So I was terrified. And it wasn't until months later that I processed this, that it really sunk into me how this reverence for the Confederacy is really about violence. It is violence, just in the way that lynching was about intimidation and violence. And so I got this threat. I went to my editor, the same one who had told me, said, oh, it's no big deal, when the guy had said this earlier before. Long story short, the paper, I didn't feel took the threat as seriously as I did. I did report it to the police, which I was reluctant to do, because years before, when I'd gotten a death threat that I took, was actually mailed to my home, and I took that seriously enough to go to the police. It was a public record, like police reports are public record. And so Jason Miles, who was of Channel 5, was a reporter, maybe y'all might remember Jason, was going through the police reports and found that the death threat report and wanted to do a story on it. And I had to beg him not to do it because I didn't want to encourage copycats. So I was reluctant to file a police report with the rape threat, but I did. At the papers, at my urging, and a lot of the tears were involved, the paper got me an armed guard, and I was in a hotel for a little less than a week. To this day, I take different routes home because I don't know who that person is. But I know that he or she theoretically, knows who I am and probably knows what I look like. But there is a cost to doing this work, and I don't say this to get sympathy, because I'm a tough girl, and you know, if something's going to happen, it's just going to happen. When you know, what can you do? Although when I got the rape threat, I didn't tell my parents because I didn't want them to worry, and I didn't go to their house because I thought if somebody's following me, the last thing I want to do is like lead them to where my loved ones live. But I think about this a lot when I think about the activists today who are fighting to take down the monuments, and they endure the same kind of abuse. And it takes a toll, you know, like there's a lot of science now about what trauma and stress does to your body. I know I am shortening my life. Like, I may not get killed, but you just can't have that exposure to that constant stress, and it not take some toll on you. And I'm sure a lot of you in the work that you do, you experience similar things, because talking about these kind of things, we're not really trained to do it. Like as excellent as my public education was, there was no class on how to have tough conversations about race and privilege and power and wealth. We didn't learn any of that. So a lot of us are just kind of making our way as we go along, and so it's going to be uncomfortable and difficult and challenging and dangerous. But one of the things that King said in his last speech in Memphis is that we need to have a kind of dangerous unselfishness. And that is the work that we do. And all of you, by your presence here tonight, are in some way committed to that, or interested in that, or want to foster that. And so it's really good to be in a space with people who are thinking about these things, and want to do something about them. So I want to say a little bit more about the violence. So you've got the violence of slavery, you've got the violence of lynching, you've got the violence that's represented in the Confederate monuments that are, as the mayor himself has said, you know, symbols of intimidation. That's why they were erected, is to intimidate. One of the things, and this is a piece that I wrote on the website, which I'll have to look and see if I can find it, is that violence shows up today in a lot of more subtle ways too, particularly public policy that we don't think about. And so I wrote a piece about what are the other things that need to come down after the monuments fall. And I do think that they're going to come down in some way, sooner rather than later. And I actually think the anniversary gives us this deadline, right, that can't be ignored. It's like a ticking clock. And so, in that way, the timing is good. So again, public policy is the actions of people who we put in office, what we choose to allow, and it's economic violence in a lot of ways. I'll just give a couple examples. Tennessee doesn't have a minimum wage, so it defaults to the federal minimum wage. There are, I think, 6 states that don't have their own state minimum wage. 5 of them are former slaveholding states. And if you think that's a coincidence, you're wrong. So not only does Tennessee not have a state minimum wage, Tennessee is also home to the highest percentage, highest share of minimum wage workers in the country. So we have not necessarily more in numbers, but the share. The Tennessee legislature I may get the year wrong, it's in one of the stories, either 2012 or 2014, passed a law that no municipality can pass its own living wage ordinance. So even if Memphis wanted to say, okay, in our city, we're gonna have a living wage, they can't. This is a Republican-dominated legislature. That's violent, right? To not set up a system where people can succeed. We've set up a system that we know is going to keep people in poverty. That was a choice, right? So when we go to the polls, who we vote for, who we support as candidates, we're making choices, and this is what the legislature has chosen to do. Another example is affordable housing. So not far from here. Wait, where's McLean in Union? That? That one? Okay. Wherever that is. The economic development engine has granted a pilot, so basically a tax break for a developer to build apartments. 20% of those apartments have to be set aside as affordable housing units. What do you think qualifies as the dollar amount of an affordable housing unit? What does an affordable housing unit start at?
$925 for a one-bedroom.
Yeah. So $925, right?
And that was a guess. I didn't know.
Yeah. So it's $960. So it's around there, right? So if you make $7.25 an hour, you work 40 hours a week, which a lot of people who work $7.25 don't get 40 hours a week, right? What does that come out to be? You can't afford $900 a month, right? But this is what we set as the threshold for affordable housing. And that's set by HUD. HUD determines that by the median income in the metro area. So not the city of Memphis, but the metro area. And they set it as a percentage of that, right? And so again, this is a system that is not designed for low-income people to be able to live in those areas. And that's intentional, right? They don't want, they're not gonna accept Section 8, right? And so this is not designed for people to be able to live in these areas. Crosstown is another example. God love redevelopment, that building needed to be changed, but it's the same thing on the affordable housing levels. There's only one 3-bedroom apartment in all of Crosstown, and I think the manager or someone connected to the development lives there. So already when you set up a place with only 2-bedroom apartments, 1 and 2-bedroom apartments, you're saying who you don't want to be there in those spaces. So the most common family construction in Memphis is a single mom and 2 kids. So it doesn't mean that that's the most of them, but of all the different kind of family combinations you can have, like a mom and a dad, or a single adult, or a single adult and 2 kids is the most common family construction. So if you have 2 kids of a different gender, is a 2-bedroom apartment even plausible? Maybe not. But again, these are choices that we've made. To set the affordable housing limit differently, there's nothing that would prevent EDGE from saying, or any of these pilot granting agencies from saying to a developer, we understand you need to make a profit, right? But what is important to us is that these apartments truly be affordable. And this is what the dollar amount is on that. Would you agree to do that? There's nothing preventing them legally from making that request, right? And maybe the developer says, no, screw you, right? Like, I don't know. But we don't even ask, right? We don't even try. And that's a choice. That's a choice that we've made. Another form of economic violence is, and I've got someone finishing a story about this now, is occupational licensing restrictions for ex-offenders. So there's some jobs you can't do if you have a felony conviction. Now for some of these jobs, like if you have a sex offense conviction, you can't work with kids. That's fine. I don't think there are a lot of people that would disagree with that. But until fairly recently, you could not operate a floor buffer if you had a felony conviction. Now what sense does that make, right? These are choices that people have made that impact people's lives. There's a very simple solution to poverty. It's money, right? Once you have more money, you're not poor. And so how do we create a society in which labor is valued, all labor is valued, and that we set up the system so people can thrive and survive and not struggle. So the last thing I'll talk about is the I Am a Man Plaza. So I think it's really interesting to think about the Confederate monuments and these statues and what they represent, and then the creation of another statue and monument in public space just a few miles away. So I went to a couple of the design sessions. For those of you who aren't familiar, the I Am a Man Plaza is going to be built in what's a gravel parking lot right now, right next to Claiborne Temple downtown. So that's what, Hernando and Pontotoc and what is that cross street? MLK or?
No, it's Hernando.
Is it Hernando and Pontotoc? And so this is going to be the largest most expensive public art project that the city has built to date. So far, the city has put in $800,000 for this, and I think they still have to raise another $1 million. They've hired a designer from California, seems like a nice guy. And the centerpiece of the park is going to be it's more than 10 foot, it might be 14 feet, basically replica that says, "I am a man." So it's like the sign that the sanitation workers wore when they were on strike in '68. It looks like it's going to be a fabulous place with granite and marble and what have you. Part of the process involves creating some kind of community statement that's going to be etched into the sky. And so I went into some of these design meetings. Sue and I were at one, to hear about how they were going to create this community statement, right? And I'm concerned, and this isn't talking out of school because I've expressed my concerns to the people involved, about how we decide what our community statement is going to be in this park that's a memorial to sanitation workers and to that movement. There's been no real public input, right? If you weren't at one of these sessions, you haven't probably been asked to contribute, and the deadline to have the statement in time for the fabrication to begin is September 20th, which is like what, next Wednesday or something like that. But it's an opportunity for us to state what our values are in this important time, but the process is not inclusive, and I'm not clear who's going to lead it. And if someone does come up with a statement that's, we want to dismantle economic justice and support a living wage for the entire community, is somebody at the chamber going to say, yeah, I don't know about that? Because on the Chamber of Commerce's website, they advertise to businesses that might want to come here that the wages in Memphis are lower than in most cities, right? So this is a selling point, Again, these are choices that we've made, and they're not made by anonymous people. One of the things I've been, it's been kind of fueling me and in the back of my mind through this whole project. When I was at Harvard, I took a class with a sociologist named Matt Desmond. He wrote a book called Evicted. It was a MacArthur Genius, it won the Pulitzer Prize. The book is about housing instability. And he said in class, what if poverty isn't an accident, but it's a robbery? Right? And so I think poverty is a robbery. The thieves have names, and the names can be known. And so part of what I want to do is to name the people who are responsible for making these decisions, right? Because maybe they can be persuaded to make different choices. Or if not, we should just know that these are the people who have made a decision to give tax breaks to developers to provide a housing that isn't affordable, right? That was a choice that somebody made, and I think we should make different choices. So it's really ironic to me that this I'm a Man Plaza is going up just a few miles from these other monuments, and we're not being as thoughtful as I think we should be about what this says and what we want it to convey. At the design meeting that Sue and I were at, there was a conversation about, the designer said that he wanted the space to be welcoming and to be a safe space. It's a safe space. And I could I could feel like the temperature rise in the room when he said that. And a gentleman there, who was from Charlottesville, he's a King Scholar, said, well, how do you balance a design aesthetic with the reality that this work is not safe, right? That it comes with risk, that it is dangerous, that the person who led this in Memphis died for this. And the designer said, I guess we could put razor blades out there if we wanted to make it dangerous. And I thought, right? And so there's still, just even in this process, in this room, in this one moment, we're not being honest about what this is. And I would hope, and as a journalist, it's not my job to come in and manage the process. I was talking to the two gentlemen who were leading it, and they said, well, what should we do? And I'm like, that's not my role. But I do wish the process would be more thoughtful, because in 50 years, I don't want us to be trying to take this monument down because we've done this poorly and without thought. So I won't continue to ramble on, but I'm glad to answer any questions, or we can just have a dialogue or anything. And it's really good to be here with y'all.
Thank you.